It was the kind of Tuesday that blurred into every other, rainy, gray, and humming with the low clatter of spoons in ceramic cups. Elena Brooks moved with practiced ease between tables, a tray balanced in one hand, a pencil tucked behind her ear. The cafe was small, cozy, and always one leak away from closure. But it was hers for now, her daily stage, and survival demanded grace. She didn't expect miracles here, just maybe enough in tips to pay rent, and perhaps a quiet shift without someone snapping their fingers at her. That morning, though, as she wiped down table 6 for the third time, she noticed him, a man alone, neatly dressed but not flashy. He sat in the corner booth, the one beneath the crooked, fresh brewed sign. His eyes were tired but alert, studying the menu with too much focus for someone just ordering eggs. She approached with a polite smile. "Coffee to start?" He looked up, nodded once. There wasn't much conversation. He ordered a modest breakfast, toast, eggs, black coffee, and ate slowly, as if each bite was a deliberate act. Elena didn't press. She never did. People brought their whole worlds into cafes like this, and she'd long ago learned to carry the tray, not the story. But when it came time to pay, the man hesitated. He patted his coat pocket, then the other, his brows knit together. He checked his pants, his wallet, his phone, panic subtle but visible. Finally, he looked up. I think I forgot my wallet." She tilted her head slightly. There was no arrogance in his tone, no attempt at excuses, just plain embarrassment. "I'm really sorry. I can, leave my name, a number, come back later." Elena studied him for a moment. Most customers, when they tried to get out of paying, had a script. This guy didn't. He looked more annoyed with himself than anything. Without a word, she walked over to the counter, pulled a 10 from her own tip jar, and slipped it into the register. "Don't worry about it," she said gently. "We've all had days." He blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I want to." To Elena, it wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't even the first time. In this job, you see people at their lowest. You learn the difference between a scammer and someone simply tired, hungry, human. She didn't know his name, didn't ask. Just gave him a receipt and a small smile before heading back to the kitchen. Behind her, the man sat still for a long time. He stared at the receipt. At her name scribbled in small letters on the bottom corner. Elena. Outside, the rain picked up. Elena returned to her routine, wiping counters, filling sugar jars, pretending the ache in her feet didn't matter. The man stood and left quietly, the bell above the door jingling a soft farewell. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. To her, he was just another stranger who had a bad morning and a forgotten wallet. What she didn't know was that the man she just paid for, Dominic Hale, was worth over $300 million. And for the first time in a long while, he had no idea how to repay someone. Dominic Hale didn't forget his wallet. He left it on purpose. It sat neatly on the marble kitchen counter of his penthouse suite, unbothered, untouched. Right beside his gold-plated cufflinks and an unopened letter from a board member he no longer trusted. That morning, like many others, he stepped out not as the owner of a nationwide restaurant empire, but as just Dom, a stranger in plain clothes. It was something he had started doing after his therapist. Yes, billionaires get therapy too. Asked him when was the last time someone was kind to him without expecting anything in return. The silence that followed had lasted longer than it should have, so he created moments, simple ones, unannounced visits to his own restaurants, dressing down, blending in, leaving his wallet behind, not to catch thieves, not to trick his staff, but to see who people were when they thought he was nobody. Most of the time, it went as expected. Excuses, impatience, sometimes even humiliation. He'd apologize, leave a number, and settle the bill later. It was an odd kind of data collection for a man who had everything yet felt oddly removed from the very people who kept his empire alive. But that day, something was different. Her name tag said Elena. She had warm eyes and sleeves rolled up to the elbows, her fingers smudged with coffee grounds. She looked tired in the way honest people often do. And when he told her he had no wallet, he braced himself for the usual look. Annoyance, suspicion, maybe condescension. Instead, she gave him $10 from her own tips. No drama, no judgment, just quiet kindness. It cracked something in him. He didn't even remember the taste of the food. He just remembered her tone, light, almost apologetic, as if helping him had somehow inconvenienced her pride. He wanted to say thank you, wanted to tell her who he was, but the moment passed too quickly, and before he could stop himself, he was out the door and into the rain. Later that night, back in his apartment, he sat on the edge of a couch that cost more than her monthly salary. He still had the receipt she gave him, creased and slightly damp. Elena written in lowercase cursive at the bottom. He held it like a letter, like a challenge. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits, acquisitions, or quarterly losses. He was thinking about a girl with tired eyes who had every reason to say no, but didn't. Dominic Hale had access to information most people could only dream of. With one phone call, he could learn a person's credit score, their former landlord's opinions, and what they ate for dinner 3 nights ago. But for once, he didn't call anyone. He didn't want the data, he wanted the truth. So he walked back to the cafe on Sycamore Street, small, cozy, not part of any chain, the kind of place that smelled like burnt toast in the morning and cinnamon around 4 p.m. She wasn't there that day. A different girl worked the counter. When Dominic asked casually if Elena was around, the girl laughed. She's probably at her second job, or helping her neighbor, or running somewhere with no time for herself. That was the first clue. Over the next week, he observed from a distance. Elena's world wasn't just modest. It was carefully stitched together, like a quilt made from scraps no one else wanted. Her apartment building was old, its bricks crumbling slightly, but she kept a small cactus in her window that bloomed yellow every spring. She left early and returned late. Never once did she take a cab. She helped the old woman who lived 2 floors down carry groceries. She paid with coins when she bought coffee filters at the corner store. She always held the door open, even when no one said thank you. She never looked rushed, but she was always moving. Dominic followed quietly. At first it felt wrong, but this wasn't stalking. It was studying, a living mystery, a quiet one. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that he hadn't stopped thinking about her, about how she gave freely with nothing in return, about how rare that was in his world. One evening, he saw her sit alone on a park bench. Sunset pooled over the pavement in copper tones. She took out a small notebook and started writing. Nothing dramatic, just small words slowly. Then she closed it, held it against her chest for a moment, and smiled at nothing. He stood across the street behind a lamppost, ashamed of how long he'd been watching. That night he searched online. Not her social media. There was none. Not her photos. None tagged. All he found was a library volunteer log and a local fundraiser she once hosted at the cafe. No drama, no scandals, no hidden past. Just a quiet girl, living a quiet life, in a world that never paid attention unless she did something loud. He returned to his apartment and stared at his reflection in the window. All his life, people chased him, for what he owned, for what he could offer. But Elena hadn't wanted anything, and now here he was, wanting everything about her. But he still couldn't bring himself to speak the truth. Not yet. He feared what it might break. The bell above the cafe door gave its usual soft chime, barely a sound, easily ignored by most. But Elena looked up out of habit, her hands mid-wipe on a table near the window. And there he was again, the man from the other day. Same coat, same eyes, a little less rain-soaked this time. She blinked in recognition, then offered a faint, polite smile. Nothing dramatic, just a simple, tired acknowledgement that said, "Ah, you're back." Dominic nodded once in return. No words, just the smallest smile and a glance toward the same table he'd sat at before, tucked in the corner near the bookshelf, close enough to the window but far enough from the noise. He didn't speak when she brought him water, didn't try to start a conversation when she handed him the menu. He simply thanked her with a look, a soft, almost apologetic kind of gratitude. She liked that, actually. Some customers treated silence like a punishment. This man wore it like a scarf, quiet, natural, and warm. Elena poured his tea when it arrived and placed a small lemon wedge on the saucer. "Still no wallet?" she teased gently, her voice kind but playful. Dominic shook his head once, then pulled out his wallet, real this time, and raised it like a white flag. She laughed. "Guess you got lucky last time." He smiled with just his eyes, said nothing. The cafe buzzed around them, orders shouted to the back, milk steamed to a whistle, chairs scraping wood. But at that table, the world moved slower. Dominic sipped his tea like it was the only thing on earth worth doing. He didn't pull out a phone, didn't fidget, just watched. He watched Elena help an elderly man find his glasses, watched her tie a little girl's shoelace when her mother was too busy on a call, watched her work the room like someone who understood how tired people felt and tried to ease it just a little. She was tired too. He could see it in her shoulders, in the way she leaned against the counter when she thought no one was looking. But she never let it show in her voice. As the afternoon wound down, the sky outside shifted from soft blue to gold. Dominic finished his tea, left the cup perfectly centered on the saucer, and stood. Elena was wiping the chalkboard near the entrance when she noticed. He walked past her, paused, then reached into his coat pocket and set down a $10 tip, exactly the cost of his tea and croissant. No flair, no message, just fair. Their eyes met one last time before he exited, the bell chiming again. She watched him walk down the street, hands in his pockets, like he belonged nowhere and everywhere all at once. When the door closed, Elena whispered under her breath, "Weird guy." But her smile lingered longer than she expected. The next time Dominic came in, it was raining again. Not as heavy as before, but steady enough to bring in that damp city smell. Elena noticed he didn't shake off his coat or rush to sit down. He stood at the door for a second, eyes on the window, as if debating whether to stay. Then he saw her. "Same table?" she asked, drying her hands on her apron. He nodded. When she brought over his usual chamomile tea this time, no lemon, she didn't rush away. "You're becoming a regular," she said, setting the cup down with a gentle clink. Dominic gave her a half smile, then leaned back a little. "Is that okay?" Elena shrugged. "Depends. Are you planning to forget your wallet again?" He chuckled quietly. "Not this time." She pulled a chair out just a bit and leaned her hands on the backrest, resting for a second. It wasn't protocol. Servers didn't sit and chat. But something about him didn't feel like work. He didn't demand, didn't drain. He was observing, not in a creepy way, in a listening way. "You're not from around here," she said. "You've got that clean shoes in a dirty city look." Dominic laughed under his breath. "Is that good or bad?" "Depends," or she replied. "Are the shoes hiding something?" He tilted his head, amused. "You always this curious?" "Only when I'm bored," she replied. But the sparkle in her eyes betrayed her. There was a pause, just long enough to feel real. Then she added, "I'm Elena, by the way." He hesitated for a beat. "Dom." Not a lie. Not the full truth either. She didn't press. He sipped his tea. "So, how long have you worked here?" "Too long," she said, smiling. "But long enough to know how to stretch tips into rent, so, silver lining." She didn't say it with bitterness. More like someone used to bending without breaking. "Do you like it?" "The cafe," she considered. "Some days, yeah. Others, I dream of smashing the espresso machine with a baseball bat." Dominic laughed harder than he expected. They talked about little things. Favorite books. How city pigeons were braver than most humans. The time she accidentally poured orange juice into someone's soup and blamed it on citrus fusion. He learned she lived alone. She learned he liked silence, but not loneliness. Not once did she ask him what he did for work. Not once did he offer it. Eventually, the cafe filled up again. Elena stood straight, pulling her hair into a loose knot. "Duty calls," she said. Dominic gave a soft nod. "Thanks for the company." "Any time, Dom," she said, walking away. And for a man who had been surrounded by boardrooms, advisors, and people who always wanted something, her saying his name like it didn't mean anything felt like everything. The morning light filtered through the cafe's foggy windows, casting soft gold over chipped tables and worn menus. Elena was halfway through her shift, apron smudged with flour and a splash of raspberry syrup from a toppled tart. When she saw him enter, her heart didn't skip a beat. Exactly. But it tripped a little. Dominic, or Dom, as she now knew him, walked in without hesitation and slid into the same corner booth. No designer suit, no Rolex in sight. Just that calm, observant silence she was starting to associate with him. "Chamomile again?" she asked. "Please," he replied with a smile. This time he stayed longer. Ordered a sandwich, ate slowly, and scribbled notes into a small, worn notebook he kept tucked under his coat. Elena resisted the urge to peek. She hated nosiness. Yet somehow this one stranger made her curious in a way that didn't feel intrusive. It felt earned. When it came time to pay, Dom pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and slid it under the chipped plate without a word. Elena scoffed as she picked it up. "This is too much," and she said, walking over. "Way too much." He met her eyes, calm, steady. "No, it isn't." She tried to hand it back. "Dom, this is like a week of groceries." "And what you did for me that day," he asked softly, "that was worth so much more." Elena blinked. It wasn't the money. It was how earnestly he said it. No smirk. No guilt-laden attempt to impress. Just quiet sincerity. Still, she hesitated. "I didn't help you for this," she said. "I know," he replied. A pause hung between them. People laughed at a nearby table. A spoon clinked into a mug. But in that little space between server and customer, something else brewed. Something more personal than coffee. Elena let the bill fall to the counter and sighed. "If I keep this, it's not a tip anymore." Dom raised a brow. "Then what is it?" "A line," she said almost to herself, "between strangers and something else." For a second she thought he'd retract it. Say nothing. Walk out. Instead he smiled and slid the bill back her way. "Then maybe I'm hoping we're not strangers." She didn't answer. Just tucked the money into the tip jar and said, "I'll allow it. This once." He laughed. "I'll take that." And just like that, the line between them, whatever it was, blurred a little more. The cafe had long since closed. Elena was taking out the trash, the night air crisp with a promise of rain. She wiped her hands on her apron and stood for a second, breathing in the quiet. No customers, no orders. Just the hum of the city winding down. Across the street, under the dim orange glow of a street lamp, she saw a figure. Familiar posture, familiar coat. Dominic? But this time he wasn't walking to the bus stop like she'd seen once or twice before. No, this time he paused near the curb, glanced around, and then approached a sleek, midnight black car that practically hummed with money. It wasn't just expensive, it was rare. The kind of vehicle no struggling writer or quiet tea drinker casually kept around. Elena froze, trash bag dangling from one hand. She watched as the driver, yes, he had a driver, stepped out and opened the door. Dominic gave a small nod, slid in, and was gone within seconds, the engine purring like something out of a luxury commercial. For a long moment she didn't move. She didn't want to assume. She'd seen customers wear nice things before. Some people save for one indulgence. But this? A chauffeured ride in a car worth more than the cafe's entire annual income? Her stomach twisted. Back inside, she wiped the counters and locked up. Her co-workers had left hours ago. Only her thoughts remained, in the quiet click of the cash register as she recounted the till. She didn't say anything to anyone. Not to the cafe owner, not to her roommate later that night, and certainly not to Dominic when he showed up the next morning as usual, ordering his chamomile tea with that same quiet smile. But something had shifted. Elena's replies were still warm, but not quite as bright. Her smile still came, but they felt measured, like someone trying to keep pace with music that suddenly changed rhythm. And Dominic noticed. "You okay?" he asked quietly, halfway through his scone. She nodded. "Yeah, just tired." But the tired wasn't physical, it was emotional. The kind that builds when your instincts whisper something and you're afraid they might be right. She didn't confront him. She didn't ask about the car, or the driver, or what exactly he was doing in her world, pretending to be someone else. She just waited. wondered, listened harder, because sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. Dominic Hale hadn't always been silent. There was a time his name echoed in business magazines, Forbes lists, and high-end restaurant openings. Hale Dining Group wasn't just a brand, it was an empire. Celebrity chefs, Michelin stars, global investors. But behind the headlines, behind the black tie galas and wineglass clinks, Dominic sat at the top of a very cold mountain. His wealth had come fast. His father, Edward Hale, passed away when Dominic was 28, leaving behind a fortune that Dominic hadn't asked for. At first, he dove into the business with passion. He learned every layer of the restaurant world, from kitchen logistics to architectural design. He rebuilt the brand in his image. Classy, calm, minimal. People praised him for being innovative. But Dominic always knew something was missing. He tried relationships. Dates turned into photo shoots. Dinners turned into interviews. Every woman seemed to know his net worth before they even asked his last name. He tried friendships, but even his closest friends expected free meals, business favors, luxury trips. Loyalty was always one layer below transaction. He tried disappearing, once flew to South America for 2 months with no press, no credit cards, no entourage. But even then, someone recognized him on the street. The headlines followed. So one day he stopped attending events, stopped letting PR firms speak for him. He moved into a modest apartment under a fake name, shaved off the suits and walked among people who didn't know who he was. He paid in cash. He walked. He watched. That's when he began noticing things others. Like the cafe girl who picked up a child's dropped toy before the mother noticed. Like the old man who left quarters at the bus stop in case someone forgot theirs. And then there was Elena. She didn't hesitate, didn't look for cameras, didn't ask for recognition. She simply paid a stranger's bill and went back to work. And something inside him broke a little, then mended. That night, Dominic sat in his apartment and pulled out an old notebook. Its pages were filled with ideas for a book he never wrote, a memoir maybe, or an exposé on how money corrupts kindness. He flipped to a new page and wrote a single sentence. I met someone today who made me feel human again. He didn't know where this story would go. But for the first time in a long time, Dominic Hale wasn't chasing expansion. He was chasing something real. 3 days after the quiet tip and the warm smile, Elena found a white envelope taped to the inside counter of the cafe. Her name was written in elegant handwriting. No return address, no logo, just Elena Brooks in soft gray ink. Inside was a letter. I'm hosting a private gathering this weekend, one night only. The pay is well above average. If you're available, I would love for you to be there. You don't need to bring anything, just yourself. Location and details below. Hope to see you. D. There was something strange about the way it was signed. No full name, just D. But she knew she didn't need a surname. That evening, she sat by the window of her tiny apartment, staring at the invitation. She had 2 shifts that weekend she'd have to cancel. Rent was due in 10 days. Her brain said no, but her gut whispered yes. The pay listed was enough to cover her half for the month, and something about it felt respectful, not flashy, not manipulative, just sincere. So she wrote a quick text to her manager and said she needed the night off. The address led her to an upscale townhouse in the quiet part of the city, hidden behind ivy-covered gates and tall oak trees. It didn't scream money, it whispered it. As she arrived, a soft-spoken woman in black welcomed her inside. You must be Elena, she smiled. Mr. Hale said you'd come. Elena froze. Mr. Hale? The name echoed in her mind, but she couldn't quite place it. The foyer smelled like fresh jasmine in old wood. Music played faintly in the distance. People laughed. Not the loud kind, the expensive kind. Everything was glowing with soft amber light. Her job wasn't difficult. She wasn't pouring drinks or carrying trays. She was asked to greet guests, offer towels, answer small questions. As the evening unfolded, Elena watched carefully. Guests in designer shoes and hushed conversations floated from room to room. Art lined the walls. The food looked like museum pieces. And at the center of it all, him, Dominic. But he wasn't in a hoodie and jeans anymore. He wore a tailored navy suit, subtle cufflinks, and a quiet, collected expression. When their eyes met across the room, something inside her fluttered and dropped at once. "You lied," her heart said. "But you didn't have to," her soul whispered back. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, Dominic approached her quietly. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded, unsure if she should be angry, flattered, or confused. He paused, then added, "I wasn't trying to trick you. I just needed to see what someone kind looked like when they didn't know they were being watched." Elena didn't reply. She simply looked at him and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, she turned once and said, "Next time, try honesty first." Then she was gone. Elena didn't sleep that night. After leaving the townhouse, she walked for nearly an hour through empty streets, past glowing windows and late-night taxis. Her shoes ached, her thoughts raced, and her heart felt like it had been wrapped in velvet, then suddenly dropped onto concrete. Dominic Hale. The name was everywhere once you looked. Articles, restaurant awards, business magazines, top 40 entrepreneurs under 40. She Googled him out of disbelief, expecting maybe a mistake. But no, he was real, and he was loaded. That whole time when he showed up broke, when he smiled quietly, when he thanked her for her kindness, he was pretending to be poor, pretending to need help. It wasn't just about money, it was about honesty, about trust. The next day, the cafe felt colder than usual. Elena arrived early, brewed the first pot of coffee, and didn't speak to anyone. Her coworkers didn't know anything. Neither did her manager. No one asked why her eyes were puffy or why her tips stayed untouched in her apron pocket. By noon, she walked out mid-shift. No explanation. She didn't go home. Instead, she went back to the townhouse. A security guard opened the door halfway. "Elena Brooks," she said firmly. "Tell him I'm here." The guard looked at her. No makeup, jacket unzipped, eyes full of heat. He nodded once and disappeared. Minutes passed. Then Dominic appeared at the door. No suit this time. Just a plain sweater, dark jeans, bare feet. "Elena," he said quietly. "You lied to me," she replied, her voice sharp. "I didn't mean to." "That's the problem," she said, stepping inside. "You didn't mean to, but you still did." He tried to explain how he'd been running this quiet experiment, how he was tired of being seen only for his bank account, how he just wanted one person, one, to treat him like a person. Elena let him talk, but her face didn't soften. "You wanted someone real," she said, "and when you found her, you weren't real back." The room fell silent. There were no more words left to twist, no explanations to soften the edge. Finally, Elena stepped back. "I don't need your money, Dominic. I don't even need your apology," she said, eyes brimming. "I needed honesty, and you gave me a game." She turned, walked toward the door, and stopped just once to whisper, "You don't need to find me again." Then she left. Dominic sat on the marble steps of his townhouse for nearly an hour after she left. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, but he didn't move. Her voice echoed through his mind. "I needed honesty. And you gave me a game." It hadn't been a game, at least not to him. The next morning, his assistant found him asleep in the foyer, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. She offered him coffee, but he waved her off. He had meetings, emails, contracts, an empire that needed steering, but nothing held weight anymore. Not when the only thing that had felt real in years had just walked away. He tried again. He waited outside the cafe for 2 mornings in a row, but Elena never came back. When he asked the manager, the reply was short. She quit. No forwarding info. Dominic went to her apartment building. Her name was gone from the buzzer. She'd disappeared, vanished like a ghost. He returned to the townhouse and found the tiny scrap of paper she'd left behind, the receipt from the meal she paid for, creased and soft at the edges. He held it like a relic, the one proof that someone out there had shown him kindness without knowing who he was. It hadn't been a test, but he understood now why it felt that way to her. 3 days later, he tracked down the cafe owner, a kind man with deep lines around his eyes who handed Dominic an envelope. "She left this," he said. "Said you'd probably come looking." Dominic opened it slowly. Inside was a single handwritten note. Kindness only matters when it's not manipulated. When it's fooled, it breaks. He stared at the words. They stung, because they were right. He sat with that sentence for hours. When it's fooled, it breaks. He hadn't meant to fool her, but that didn't mean he hadn't. His wealth had built walls between him and the world. And when someone finally reached over, he'd handed them a mask. Late that night, Dominic wrote a letter of his own, but he didn't send it. Instead, he placed it gently in a drawer beside the receipt, a reminder of what it meant to truly be seen and how easily that could be lost. He didn't know where Elena was, but he knew what she deserved next wasn't another explanation. It was action. By the time Dominic reached the cafe the next morning, the little bell above the door gave its usual jingle, but the energy inside was different. Her laughter wasn't there. Her gentle presence, the way she arranged the sugar jars just so, was missing. "Elena?" he asked the barista behind the counter. "She quit," came the casual reply. "Left late last night. Didn't say much." He blinked. "Did she leave a note?" The barista shook her head. "Nope. Just her apron and her last paycheck. Said she wouldn't be needing it." Dominic walked out without ordering anything. He got into his car but didn't start it. For the first time in years, he had no direction, no calendar reminders, no scheduled meetings, just a rising sense of dread and regret. He visited her old apartment. A "for rent" sign was already taped to the door. No furniture, no traces. It was as if she'd evaporated into the city itself. He knocked anyway, no answer. The following days turned into a quiet obsession. He called every mutual contact. No one knew where she'd gone. He checked local job postings, community boards, even asked the cafe's food suppliers if they'd seen her. He scrolled social media, but she had no real presence there. Just an old account with a cat photo from 3 years ago. He even hired a private investigator. No leads. Dominic wandered the neighborhood at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of her at a corner store, a bus stop, anywhere. But every shadow that looked like her dissolved when he blinked. He watched the city's crowds like a man searching for a ghost. At one point, he sat alone in the cafe parking lot until dawn, staring at the front door, hoping it might open. It never did. He began to carry her note in his pocket. Kindness only matters when it's not manipulated. He read it over and over. It became his silent punishment, a reminder of the line he'd crossed, of how even good intentions can ruin fragile truths. Weeks passed, and still, nothing. She was gone, but not forgotten. The cafe had never felt so dim. It wasn't the lighting, it was something else. The quiet hum of the coffee machine, the occasional clink of a spoon on ceramic. It all felt louder in Elena's absence. Dominic stood at the counter once again, unsure of why he came back. Maybe hope was a habit hard to break. The owner, a middle-aged woman with graying curls and warm eyes, emerged from the back. She paused when she saw him. "You're the guy who keeps showing up." Dominic gave a half smile. "I'm not very good at letting go." She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Wait here." She disappeared into the office behind the kitchen and returned with a worn envelope. It was small, plain, and sealed with a single strip of tape. "She left this," the woman said softly. "Told me if you ever came back looking lost, I'd know who it was for." Dominic's hands trembled as he took it. There was no name on the outside, no date, just weight. Emotional, invisible, but heavy all the same. He opened it slowly. Inside, a single handwritten note. "Kindness only matters when it's not manipulated. When it's fooled, it breaks." Dominic sat down at a corner table, the one where she usually folded napkins and hummed quietly to herself. He read the words over and over again. Each time they cut a little deeper. This wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Her kindness had never been about reward or recognition. It had been instinct, not strategy. And what he had done, showing up with hidden intentions, had turned something pure into something poisoned. He hadn't meant to hurt her, but meaning wasn't enough. For the rest of the day, he sat there. Coffee grew cold beside him. The city moved on outside the windows. But Dominic stayed still, finally beginning to understand what Elena had given and what he had broken. Not her love, not even her trust, her peace, and now she was gone. Dominic had visited dozens of neighborhoods in his life, some in search of property, some for expansion deals, some simply to escape himself. But none of them ever felt like this. It was quiet, almost too quiet. A long stretch of older apartment buildings, rusted fences, faded murals, and sidewalks cracked with the weight of time and stories that had long stopped being told. He double-checked the address scribbled on the back of Elena's old resume. This had to be it. A faded mailbox still bore the name Brooks in chipped gold lettering. He knocked on 3 different doors in the building. 2 didn't answer. 1 slammed in his face. Then finally, on the 4th floor, an older woman peeked out. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone. Elena Brooks. She used to live here," Dominic said. The woman eyed him suspiciously. "What for?" "I think I owe her something," he replied. Her eyes narrowed, then softened. "Come in." The apartment smelled like old tea and dryer sheets. The woman, Mrs. Navarro, poured him a cup of chamomile without asking, as if his nerves had already told her what he needed. Elena lived here with her mother. Sweet girl, quiet, but she carried the kind of weight most people don't see. Dominic listened in silence. She worked constantly. Cafes, diners, front desks, always smiling to customers. But when she came home, she'd stare out that window for hours. Dominic glanced over to the dusty window, a small ledge lined with potted plants now half wilted in the shade. "She ever mention a dream?" he asked. Mrs. Navarro nodded slowly. She wanted her own place, not just a job, a cafe. Said she'd call it something simple, something kind. Told me once, "People forget how soft the world can be. I want to make a place where they remember." Dominic closed his eyes. The note, the folded kindness, the quiet strength. It all made sense now. She hadn't just disappeared. She had gone somewhere. He just didn't know where yet. But now he had something he didn't have before. A direction. He stood to leave. "Thank you," he said sincerely. The old woman smiled. "If you find her, tell her the plants miss her." Dominic smiled too. "I think I do too." 2 weeks passed with no word, no sign, no update. But Dominic wasn't idle. He wasn't the kind of man to sit back when his heart had already committed. This wasn't about guilt anymore. This was gratitude. Quiet, steady, and overdue. He spent nights researching affordable retail spaces in Elena's old neighborhood, asking around under a different name, dressing down to blend in. The process was slow, like trying to rebuild a memory that didn't belong to him. Until one evening, tucked between a laundromat and an old tailor's shop, he found it. A small storefront, chipped teal paint on the awning, dusty windows, a crooked "for lease" sign swinging in the wind like a last call. It looked tired, but hopeful, like someone, somewhere, might still believe in it. Dominic did. He walked in. By morning, the deposit was down, and the first month's rent was paid. He didn't write his name. He didn't sign a check. Instead, he slid an envelope through the old cafe where Elena used to work, anonymously. The outside simply said, "For the one who gave first." Inside, a typed letter on plain paper. "There's a rare kind of kindness that expects nothing, asks for no recognition, and still shines. You gave that, without knowing who I was, without asking for anything back. So here's something in return. Also nameless, because that's what makes it real. No strings, just space. Yours if you want it." Under the letter, a small printed lease agreement. Address 1349 Maple Avenue. Attached, a receipt showing first month's rent paid and security deposit secured. Nothing more, no sender name, no explanation, just opportunity. That night, Dominic stood across the street and watched as the cafe owner locked up for the day, envelope in hand. He didn't wait to see if it reached her. He didn't need to, because for the first time, Dominic had given something with no expectation, no spotlight, just the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, Elena would walk into that little storefront, turn the key and see not a gift, but a beginning. The building at 1349 Maple Avenue had once been forgotten, just another cracked brick in a city that moved too fast. But now it smelled like fresh paint and roasted coffee beans. The teal awning had been fixed. The crooked sign was gone. And in its place, written in gentle script above the glass door, quiet kindness. Elena stood behind the counter, smoothing the edge of the pastry display with her sleeve. Her eyes were puffy from sleepless nights, her hands calloused from scrubbing and scrubbing, but her smile was real. This wasn't just a cafe. It was a heartbeat she'd resurrected. She didn't know how it had happened. The letter had no name. The lease had no sender. But somehow the keys fit. The papers were legit, and the rent was paid. Part of her wanted to question it, to dig, to suspect. But another part, the part that had lived on pennies and stubborn hope, whispered, maybe the world finally gave something back. So she took it. She put up old photos of her grandmother in the corner booth, hung watercolor art from local kids, and left a notebook on each table for strangers to write anything they wanted. Poems, dreams, confessions. One page already read, "Today I sat alone, and it didn't feel empty." Across the street, Dominic Hale stood under a rusted fire escape, a hoodie pulled low, sunglasses hiding his face. He watched as the open sign flipped at 7 a.m. sharp, watched as Elena turned on the lights one by one, watched as her first customer, a delivery driver with a limp, handed her a crumpled $5 bill, and she gave back a warm croissant and an even warmer smile. He didn't step inside. Not yet. This wasn't his moment. It was hers. As the morning rush began, Elena took a break behind the counter. She opened her tiny ledger, checking the numbers. They didn't look great yet, but she didn't care. The air here felt different. Lighter. Like maybe for once, she wasn't surviving. She was building. Then someone slid a napkin across the counter. It read, "Best coffee I've had. Best feeling I've felt." She looked up. No one was there. But a man was walking away down the sidewalk, his head low, his gait familiar. For a moment she almost called out, "Dom?" but stopped herself. Instead she whispered into the empty cafe, "Thank you." Not for the money, not for the place, but for believing in her, quietly. He always came in early, before the line, before the world got noisy. A plain black coat, worn leather boots, a soft nod for hello. He never ordered anything complicated, just a black coffee, no sugar. Sat by the window every time, same corner seat. Watched the street like it was a movie only he could understand. At first, Elena didn't notice him. Not really. There were bills to pay, beans to grind, muffins to bake. Every customer blended into the next. But this man, he was different in ways that were so subtle, they snuck up on her. He didn't speak, didn't linger, didn't flirt, didn't scroll on a phone, just existed, present. And yet something about him always made her pause, like a word on the tip of her tongue. Weeks passed. He became part of the place. The regulars called him Quiet Guy. One time a kid tripped and spilled orange juice near his table. The man had stood instantly, helping clean the mess before anyone else reacted. Then he quietly returned to his seat as if it never happened. He never gave a name, never made small talk. But once, when Elena refilled his cup for free, he looked up, just for a second, and she saw it. Those eyes. She didn't say anything, just blinked, smiled, walked away. But her chest was pounding. That night, she pulled out the old note from her wallet, the one from the cafe owner, the one Dominic had left behind. Same slant in the letters, same slightly heavy pressure in the pen strokes. Her hands shook. It had been him, all this time. The next morning, she brewed his coffee before he even walked in. When the bell rang and he entered, she was already waiting at the counter. "Hi, Dom," she said softly. He froze mid-step. Elena stepped closer. "I didn't see you before." "Not really, but I do now." His eyes glistened. He didn't reply, not with words, but he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a napkin, and handed it to her. On it, in that familiar writing, "I didn't want to come back into your life unless I could do it quietly, respectfully. But I never stopped watching over you." Elena smiled, placed the note in her apron, and nodded toward the window seat. "Your table's still yours," she said, "if you want it." Dominic walked past the counter, took his seat, And for the first time since Quiet Kindness had opened, he stayed, not just to watch, but to be seen. It was a slow morning. Rain tapped gently against the windows, casting shifting shadows across the warm wooden floor. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and espresso danced through the cafe. Elena wiped down a table, but her mind was somewhere else. Or rather, someone else. Dominic sat in his usual seat, that quiet corner by the window. Same black coat, same stillness. But today, something in his posture was different. His hands weren't resting. They were folded tightly, knuckles pale. He wasn't watching the street. He was watching her. When she brought over his coffee, she didn't say a word. Just placed it gently on the table, like always. But he looked up. "Elena," he said, his voice barely louder than the rain outside. "There's something I've been needing to say." She froze. That voice, it was softer than she remembered, but unmistakably him. The stranger who wasn't a stranger, the millionaire who never acted like one, the man who disappeared, then returned with silence in his pockets and regret in his eyes. He stood up slowly, pulling something from his coat pocket. It wasn't money or paper or keys. It was a small, slightly crumpled cafe receipt. From the first day, the one she had paid for. Dominic placed it on the table. "That day I didn't just forget my wallet," he said. "I wanted to forget everything. My title, my bank account, all of it. I needed to see if someone would care, without a reason to." Elena sat down across from him, her fingers brushing the edge of the receipt. "And when you did," he continued, "you reminded me what real looks like. What kindness sounds like." There was a long pause. The cafe felt quieter than ever. "I'm Dominic Hale," he said finally. "But with you, I just wanted to be Dom." His voice cracked on the last word. Elena leaned back, her eyes searching his. There was no charm, no performance, no defense in his face. Just truth. Exhausted, stripped truth. She remembered the pain of finding out, the confusion, the betrayal, the feeling of being part of something fake. But now, this wasn't fake. She looked down at the coffee between them. Warm, honest, uncomplicated. Then back at him. "You could have told me," she said gently. "You didn't have to test me." "I wasn't testing you," he said. "I was hoping you'd prove me wrong about the world." She smiled. Not fully, but enough. Then she reached for her cup, lifted it toward him like a tiny toast. "To Dom," she said, "the man who almost ruined everything by caring too much." He let out a breath that sounded like laughter and heartbreak stitched together. And for the first time in a long time, they sat not as strangers, not as test subjects, not as guilt and forgiveness, but as two people who finally understood each other. Through coffee, through silence, through something real. Elena didn't speak right away. The cafe was quiet except for the low hum of the espresso machine and the occasional soft clink of cups. Outside, people hurried past, umbrellas swaying like slow metronomes. But inside, time felt paused, like the world had stopped spinning just for them. Dominic looked at her across the table, nervous but open. There were no defenses left in him, just hope and something deeper, unspoken. Elena finally set her cup down, her fingers curled loosely around it, like it anchored her in the moment. "I had no one in my life," she said quietly. "No one to look at me the way you did that day." Dominic blinked. She went on. "You didn't say much, barely anything. But the way your eyes followed me, there was something different. Like for the first time, I wasn't just some girl scraping by. I was seen." Dominic's throat tightened. "I didn't help you because I was trying to be good," Elena said. "I helped you because I knew what it felt like. To be overlooked. To feel invisible in a world that only notices what it can use." She smiled, small and unsure. "I saw you because I hoped someone like you could exist." He leaned forward slowly, still saying nothing. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. She smoothed it out on the table. On it were 3 tiny doodles, a cup, a sun, and 2 eyes. "I used to draw this every day after you left," she said. "The cup for the coffee, the sun for how warm it felt, and the eyes, because yours didn't lie. even when I didn't know who you were." Dominic stared at the napkin. His fingers hovered over it like it was made of gold. "I don't care how much money you have," she continued. "I care about why you came back." Now she looked at him fully. No fear, no hesitation. "Did you come back because of guilt?" she asked. "Because I disappeared? Or because something in you changed too?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I missed the only person who made me feel like more than my money." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of clarity, of softness, of a slow, mutual undoing. Elena reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Then stay," she said. "Stay, not as Dominic Hale, just as the man who remembered what it means to see and be seen." He nodded, unable to form words. Because love, he realized in that moment, had nothing to do with grand gestures or signed checks. It was in the quiet things: a shared glance, a paid-for meal, a stranger who stayed. The next morning, Elena arrived at the cafe before sunrise. She unlocked the door like always, turned on the lights, and began brewing the first pot of coffee. Everything felt the same, but it wasn't. Not anymore. She looked at the table by the window. Dominic was already there, early as usual. But this time, there was no invisible wall between them. She approached with 2 cups, his usual and hers. Before she could speak, he pulled out an envelope and placed it gently on the table. "What's this?" she asked cautiously. He slid it toward her. "A contract," he said. "One you don't have to sign if it doesn't feel right." She opened it with trembling fingers. The cafe deed, 50% of it, now bore her name. "I don't need this," she said, voice shaking. "I know," Dominic replied, "but I do." He gestured to the cafe around them. "This place, it was always meant to be yours. I just happened to walk into it before you did." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. "Why would you do this?" He gave a soft smile. "Because you paid for my breakfast when I was just another face. Because you saw a person, not a price tag. And because I want to build something real. With you." She folded the deed back into the envelope. "Then we need a new name," she said, half laughing, half crying. He raised an eyebrow. She walked over to the chalkboard menu and erased the words "Quiet Kindness." Then slowly she wrote, "Kind Grounds." Dominic stood beside her, watching as the chalk moved with quiet certainty. Later that evening, the cafe was full, not with customers, but with warmth. Friends dropped by, neighbors stayed longer. Someone left a handwritten poem by the sugar jars. As the day closed, Dominic locked the doors while Elena wiped down the counters. She turned to him and said, "You were never just a stranger, were you?" He shook his head. "No," he said, "but you made me wish I was, so I could meet you all over again." They sat at the window table as the city dimmed outside. No fancy suits, no headlines, no grand announcement. Just 2 hands resting side by side. 2 hearts finally aligned. And on the window, written in soft white paint, a single quote: "She paid for a stranger's meal, and that stranger chose to share the rest of his life with her."